The night that changed Nysera's fate began with a betrayal. Deep within the ancient forest, an old stone manor glowed with the light of 100 candles. Inside, powerful alphas from across the territory gathered in silence. Low voices echoed amidst the shadows, cold as predators waiting for their prey. It was not a banquet. It was the Omega auction, a secret bidding, where young Omegas were sold like rare commodities. Nysera stood in the center of the vast room, her hands trembling. The person she had trusted most had lured her here and sold her like merchandise. But fear sometimes compels even a weak Omega to do the unthinkable, and Nysera ran. She lunged through the dark corridors of the manor, her breath coming in gasps, her heart pounding. Doors blurred past her vision, while behind her, the footsteps of the pursuit drew ever closer. Then, in a fit of desperation, she flung open a random door. A mistake. A mistake that would alter the entire course of her life. Inside that room was a man whom the entire territory feared. Alpha King Draeven. He stood silent in the moonlight streaming through the high window, his figure tall and commanding like a king of shadows. His cold golden eyes slowly shifted toward the Omega, who had just burst into his private chambers. The entire room plunged into silence. Every pack in the territory knew one thing. Alpha King Draeven was a tyrant, a merciless sovereign, an alpha whom even the strongest warriors dared not oppose. But what happened next turned Nysera's fate in an entirely different direction. For instead of killing the Omega who had intruded upon his room, Draeven only watched her in silence. Moonlight reflected in the Alpha King's golden eyes.
Keep out of sight.
A few seconds passed. Then he spoke a single word. Run. And Nysera ran. But she did not know that from the moment she stepped into that room that night, the gears of her fate had begun to shift. It would drag her into a conspiracy capable of shaking the Alpha King's entire kingdom. And the most terrifying thing of all, Alpha King Draeven would never forget the scent of the girl who had entered that room. Part I, the wrong room. Tungmot, the betrayal. 3 days before the auction, the small village where Nysera lived lay peacefully under the early summer moonlight. Old wooden houses were scattered amidst the forest, where ordinary Omegas lived quiet lives, staying far away from the wars of the great packs. Nysera had always thought her life would pass in that very place. No glory, no danger, only simplicity and peace. Until an old acquaintance appeared at her door. He brought a friendly smile and a seemingly harmless proposal. A small job in the manor of a wealthy alpha. Just one night of work, and the pay would be enough for Nysera to live comfortably for months. Nysera had trusted him. She did not know that the trip would lead her to a place where no Omega should ever set foot. A manor hidden deep in the forest. A building where powerful alphas gathered in secret. And a place where young Omegas were sold like rare commodities. By the time Nysera realized the truth, it was too late. The heavy metallic sound of the iron gates closing rang out in the quiet night, cold as a pronounced sentence. Nysera stood frozen in the manor's vast stone courtyard, her heart pounding in her chest. No one said a word to her, but just looking around was enough to understand that this place was entirely different from what she had been promised. Tall men stood along both sides of the walkway, their cold gazes observing every step of the newly brought Omegas. There was no music, no banquet tables, nor any sign of a lavish ceremony. Instead, there was the heavy atmosphere of power and a terrifying silence. Nysera turned to look at the man who had brought her here. You said this was a party. Her voice was so small it nearly dissolved into the night wind. The man looked at her for a long time, his gaze no longer holding a hint of friendliness. The familiar smile that had once made Nysera feel safe had vanished completely. That is right, he said slowly. Only, it is not the kind of party you think. 2 guards stepped forward. One of them gripped Nysera's arm before she could react. Wait, Nysera tried to pull her arm back, looking around in panic. Is there some mistake? I only came here to work. There is no mistake. The man cut her off, his voice calm to the point of coldness. You have been sold already. Those words fell like a knife strike. Nysera was paralyzed. Sold, she whispered, but no one answered. The guard dragged her up the stone steps leading into the manor. The massive wooden doors opened, revealing a vast hall illuminated by hundreds of candles. Dark leather chairs were arranged in an arc, and many alphas were already seated upon them, alphas whom Nysera had never seen in her life. Their overpowering scent filled the room, the scent of strength, of power, of those accustomed to commanding and being obeyed. A few turned their heads to look at her as she was dragged in, their gazes sweeping over Nysera as if assessing a newly delivered piece of merchandise. An alpha chuckled softly. A new Omega. Another took a sip of wine, his gaze cold. Not bad at all. Nysera felt her throat go dry. Only now did she realize she was not the only Omega here. At the far side of the hall, several other young girls were standing close together. Some kept their heads bowed low, some were trembling, some were struggling to hold back tears. All of them understood what Nysera had just realized. This was not a party, this was an auction, and they were the merchandise. Nysera took a step back by instinct, but the guard's hand tightened. Stand still. On the balcony above the hall, another man appeared. He wore a luxurious dark suit, his sharp gaze scanning the room like an owner inspecting his assets. The entire hall fell silent immediately. Lords, alphas, he raised his voice, echoing through the room. Tonight's auction will begin in just a few minutes. A few low laughs rose among the alphas. Nysera felt her legs go cold, and in her mind, only a single thought remained. She had to leave this place by any means, and at any cost. For if the auction began, there would be no way back. Chapter 2. The Auction Night. The manor's great hall grew increasingly crowded as night descended. Alphas from various packs entered one by one, their dark cloaks sweeping lightly across the cold stone floor. Their scents mingled in the air, powerful, overpowering, making even the act of breathing difficult for the Omegas held within the room. Nysera stood with the other girls at the far end of the hall. No one spoke. No one dared to look directly at the alphas, seated in the large leather chairs before them. Nysera clenched her hands to stop them from trembling. She had never seen so many alphas in her life. Real alphas. Not the ordinary men from her small village, but warriors, pack leaders, those accustomed to commanding and being obeyed. Their gazes swept over the Omegas standing in line, much like merchants inspecting the quality of rare goods. A silver-haired alpha leaned forward. "That girl," he said to the auctioneer. "Bring her into the light." Nysera realized he was looking at her. Her heart tightened instantly. Two guards dragged her forward a few steps. The candlelight from the massive chandelier above poured down, making her feel as though she were standing in the center of a stage. A few alphas began to whisper to one another. "Is she new? Her scent is quite pure. How old?" Nysera felt her throat go dry. She did not dare to lift her head. The man standing on the balcony, the auctioneer, looked down at the room with a satisfied smile. "Lords alphas," he announced loudly. "The Omegas tonight have all been thoroughly inspected. Young, healthy, and completely unmarked." Low chuckles rose from the crowd of alphas. Nysera felt her stomach twist. The auctioneer raised his hand, signaling the start. "The bidding will commence in a few minutes." In that moment, Nysera knew that if she remained still for just a second longer, her fate would be decided by the men sitting before her. She scanned the room once more. The main exit was guarded, and the high windows were too far out of reach. But on the right side of the hall, there was a dark corridor leading toward the rear of the manor, a passage few seemed to notice. Nysera's heart began to pound faster. If there was any chance to escape this place, it was now, before the auction began. She took a deep breath. Then, while all eyes were directed toward the balcony, Nysera quietly stepped back. One step, then another. No one called her name. No one blocked her path. Within a few fleeting seconds, Nysera had broken away from the line of Omegas and slipped into the dark corridor. The light from the hall quickly vanished behind her. Only the cold stone walls and the hurried echoes of her own footsteps remained in the narrow space. Nysera ran. She did not know where this corridor led. She only knew one thing. She had to leave this manor immediately. But Nysera had no idea that this manor was far larger than she imagined. And as she fled through those unfamiliar hallways, she was about to open a door that she should never have touched. Chapter 3. The Escape. Nysera ran, and with every step she took further away, the raucous noise gradually faded, leaving only the terrifying stillness of the unfamiliar corridors. She did not know where she was heading. She only knew one thing. She had to leave this place. Nysera rounded a corner, nearly colliding with the cold stone wall. Her dress snagged on the edge of a small table placed along the walkway, causing a metal vase upon it to vibrate slightly. She froze instantly, listening. There were no footsteps immediately behind her. But in the distance, a guard's voice rang out. "An Omega has left the line." Another answered. "Check the eastern corridor." Nysera felt her breath catch in her throat. She kept running. Corridor after corridor, the high stone walls and dark wooden doors looked identical, causing her to quickly lose her sense of direction. The torches mounted on the walls grew sparse, and the vast manor began to grow silent. Too silent. Nysera slowed a bit, struggling to regulate her breathing. This no longer seemed to be the area near the Great Hall. The rooms here were larger, the wooden doors more intricately carved, and there were no guards on watch. She had run too far, but perhaps that was a stroke of luck. Nysera continued forward, her footsteps lighter, more cautious. Then she turned into another hallway, and she immediately realized this place was entirely different from those before it. There were no torches. Only cold moonlight streamed through the high windows, stretching into silver streaks across the stone floor. No voices, no guards, no sound at all except for her own heartbeat. A cold sensation slowly crept down Nysera's spine. It was as if she had just entered a place where no one should set foot. As she passed a massive stone pillar, Nysera's gaze inadvertently swept over the adjacent wall, and she stopped dead. On the wall hung a crest of black metal. The symbol engraved upon it was a crowned wolf beneath a full moon. The moonlight from the window reflected off the dark metal surface, making the wolf's eyes appear as though they were staring directly at her. Nysera did not know who that symbol belonged to, but just looking at it, she felt a terrifying authority radiating from the engraving. Like this corridor, it belonged to someone no one dared to disturb. At the end of the hallway stood a door. A massive, dark wooden door, significantly taller than any other door in the manor. No guards, no locks. Nysera turned her head to look back. Far off in the corridor she had just fled through, torchlight was gradually drawing closer. The faint clinking of metal armor echoed. It was the guards. They were looking for her. Nysera turned back to the door before her. Perhaps behind it was just an ordinary room. Perhaps it was a dead end. But it was the only chance remaining. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly as it touched the cold metal handle. In that fleeting moment, Nysera had no idea that behind this door was not an empty room. It was the private chambers of Alpha King Draeven, and the moment she decided to open that door, her fate and the fate of another were changed forever. Chapter 4. The Wrong Door. The heavy wooden door opened in silence. Nysera took a single step inside, then stopped right at the threshold. The room behind the door was larger than she had imagined. There were no blazing torches like in the auction hall. Only cold moonlight streamed through the high windows, casting pale silver streaks across the stone floor. The air here was terrifyingly still. Nysera quickly stepped inside and closed the door behind her. She only intended to hide here for a few minutes, long enough for the guards to pass through the corridor. But as soon as the door shut, a low voice rang out from the far side of the room. "Who are you?" Nysera stiffened. The voice was not loud, but it carried an authority that seemed to weigh down the entire room. Nysera slowly turned her head, and that was when she saw him. On the other side of the room, near the large window, a man stood in the moonlight. His figure was tall and solid, his broad shoulders casting a long shadow on the stone floor. The moonlight illuminated his sharp, cold features and the golden eyes that were staring directly at her. That gaze was silent, composed, yet it made Nysera feel more endangered than any threat could. She immediately understood that she had made a terrible mistake. "I am sorry," Nysera stammered, instinctively taking a step back. I opened the wrong door. I will leave right now." But the man did not answer. He only watched her. That gaze was not like the eyes of the Alphas in the Great Hall. It held no greed or interest at the sight of an Omega. It was the gaze of someone accustomed to being obeyed, accustomed to standing above everyone else. Nysera felt her heart pound to the point of aching. An inexplicable sense of peril spread through her body because in that moment, she suddenly realized something. This man was no ordinary Alpha. He took another step out of the shadows. The moonlight revealed his face more clearly, highlighting the sharp lines and the majesty that seemed to envelop the entire room with his presence. Nysera instinctively stepped back again, and then her eyes inadvertently landed on his hand. On his finger was a black silver ring. The face of the ring was engraved with a crowned wolf beneath a full moon. Nysera instantly recalled the crest on the wall outside in the corridor. The same symbol, the same wolf. A chill ran down her spine. Only one person in the territory bore that symbol. Nysera took a sharp breath. The man before her was Alpha King Draeven. That name alone was enough to make even the strongest Alphas wary. A king famous for being ruthless and cold, one who ruled the territory with absolute power. And Nysera had just burst straight into his private chambers. She turned, intending to open the door and flee. But just then, the sound of footsteps echoed from the corridor on the other side of the door. "Check the western wing. That Omega cannot have run far." Nysera stood paralyzed. If she opened the door right now, the guards would spot her immediately. She slowly turned her head back. Draeven still stood there, his golden eyes calmly watching her. No anger, no confusion, only observation. The silence between them stretched out. Moonlight slid across the stone floor. Outside the door, the guard's footsteps drew closer. Nysera felt her breath tremble. If the Alpha King spoke but a single word, it would all be over. But Draeven did not call the guards. He did not give a command. He only looked at the girl standing trembling in the middle of his room. And in that moment, a very faint scent drifted through the air. Pure, gentle, like moonlight upon a still lake. Draeven frowned slightly, his gaze lingering on Nysera a moment longer. Then he spoke. Just one word. Run. Nysera did not think for another second. She opened the door and lunged into the corridor, running through the streaks of moonlight on the stone floor, running through the long hallways of the manor, fleeing from that room as fast as she could. But as her footsteps vanished from the corridor, Alpha King Draeven remained standing by the window. The moonlight reflected off the black-silver ring on his hand. In that quiet room, he realized something strange. He could not forget the scent of the girl who had just entered his chamber. A scent, just like the moonlight. Chapter 5. Tyrant in the Moonlight. The Alpha King's chambers returned to silence after the door shut. Nysera had long since vanished from the corridor, yet Draeven remained motionless by the window. Moonlight flooded through the high glass panes, coating the stone floor and his broad shoulders in a layer of cold, silver light. The forest outside was submerged in a quiet night, but within this room, something had changed. Draeven had not yet left his position. He was not accustomed to paying mind to stranger omegas. Auctions of that nature were none of his concern. Alphas from various territories gathered at this manor for their own interests, and Draeven had never cared for such trade. However, the girl who had just fled this room caused him to linger longer than usual. Her image remained vivid in his memory, a young omega with panicked eyes, standing in the center of the Alpha King's chamber, like a small beast lost in a predator's domain. But what Draeven remembered most was not her fear. It was her scent. A very faint fragrance still lingered in the air. Pure, gentle, like moonlight reflected upon still waters. A fresh, unfamiliar scent, in a room only accustomed to the smells of metal, leather, and dark wood. Draeven frowned slightly. He did not like the presence of a foreign scent remaining in his room for too long. A knock sounded behind him. 3 short, firm raps. Draeven did not turn. "Come in." The door opened, and a tall man entered the room. Upon his shoulder was the silver insignia of a high-ranking beta. Kaelor stopped a few paces behind the Alpha King, his sharp gaze quickly sweeping the room before halting at Draven's back. "My Alpha King," Kaelor said in a low voice. "An omega has escaped from the auction." Draeven continued to stare at the night forest outside the window. "I know." Kaelor was silent for a second. "You have seen her." A light breeze brushed past the window frame, stirring the dark curtains. Draeven slowly turned. The moonlight shone upon the black silver ring on his hand. The crowned wolf appeared vivid under the full moon, as if stirring awake. "She entered here," Draeven said. Kaelor froze. "Into your chambers. She opened the wrong door." Kaelor said nothing for several seconds. That rarely happens. Few omegas remain alive after stepping wrongly into the Alpha King's private room. "Where is she now?" Kaelor asked. Draeven turned back toward the window. "I let her go." Kaelor frowned. He had followed Draeven for many years, long enough to know the Alpha King was not the type of person to make such a decision. "You let her go." Draeven did not answer. The silence stretched out for a while in the vast room. Finally, Kaelor spoke, his voice lower. 3 major packs are present at the auction tonight. If they know an omega has escaped." He paused slightly. "And if they know she entered your room." Draeven turned his head. His golden gaze was calm to a terrifying degree. "They will not know." Kaelor looked at him. "Are you certain?" Draeven looked at his beta for a moment. Because none of them possessed the courage to ask. Kaelor did not protest. He knew that was the truth. In this territory, there were many powerful alphas, but only one Alpha King. Kaelor exhaled softly. "Should we send men to find the omega then?" Draeven turned back to look at the night forest. The moonlight shone upon the stone floor, upon the silver ring on his hand, and upon the room that had now returned to stillness. For a long time, he said nothing. Finally, Draeven spoke softly. "No need." Kaelor frowned. "No need." Draeven tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something in the air. Then he spoke slowly. "She will return." Kaelor looked at the Alpha King. "Why are you so sure?" Draeven was silent. In the quiet room, That scent remained. So faint it was nearly impossible to grasp, yet Draven still sensed it. Finally, he spoke, his voice deep. Because I still remember her scent, a scent like the moonlight, and Draven knew one thing, he would not forget it. Chapter 6. The Vanished Girl. After Kaelor left the room, Draven remained alone by the window. Moonlight streamed through the high glass panes, stretching across the stone floor, and coating his broad shoulders in a layer of cold, silver light. Outside, the forest surrounding the manor was submerged in a quiet night. From this vantage point, Draven could see the torches burning in the front courtyard, and the slight movements of guards searching the corridors. They were still hunting for the girl who had escaped the auction. Draven said nothing, but in his mind, her image had not faded. An Omega straying into the Alpha King's private chambers, an Omega who should have died for such a mistake. Yet, Draven had not ordered her capture. He slightly tightened his hand. The black silver ring on his finger reflected the moonlight. The crowned wolf engraved on its surface seemed to growl beneath the silver glow. That scent still lingered faintly in the air, so light it was nearly invisible to anyone else. Yet Draven still sensed it. Pure, gentle, yet as distinct as the moonlight itself tonight. Draven frowned slightly, then turned to stride out of the room. As he appeared in the corridor, the guards immediately stood at attention. No one dared to ask where the Alpha King was headed. They only bowed as he passed. Draven went straight down the stone staircase leading to the manor's great hall. The moment he stepped into that vast room, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The Alphas sitting around the auction area turned their heads. A few stood up instinctively. Small conversations died out at once. No one expected the Alpha King to appear here. Draven said nothing. He merely stood at the edge of the hall and observed. The Omegas still stood in line on the other side of the room, their gazes fixed on the stone floor. A few trembled as they sensed his presence. On the balcony above, the auctioneer immediately bowed his head. "My Alpha King, we did not know you were present." Draven looked up. "Continue." His voice was low, yet it echoed clearly through the room. The auction proceeded. A young Omega was dragged onto the floor. Torchlight illuminated her panicked face as the Alphas began to bid. 30,000. 40. 45. The numbers rose, cold and clinical. Draven watched the scene for a few seconds. He had never liked these types of auctions. They brought too many foreign alphas into his territory. And tonight, the number of alphas in this room was higher than usual. Too many. Kaelor stepped up beside him. 3 major packs are participating, the beta said softly. And several rogue alphas. Draven frowned slightly. That explained the heightened tension in the room. Another Omega was brought to the floor. The girl shook as the alphas continued to bid. Draven watched for a few more seconds. Then he turned away. "Terminate the auction." Kaelor stiffened slightly. "My lord." Draven did not stop walking. "I have spoken." His voice was not loud, but it was enough for Kaelor to understand the command had been issued. "End it." Kaelor nodded and immediately headed toward the balcony. Meanwhile, Draven left the hall. The noise behind him gradually faded as the guards began to disperse the crowd of alphas. Draven stopped on a balcony overlooking the grounds. The distant forest was bathed in silver moonlight. Somewhere out there, that girl was fleeing. Kaelor appeared behind him a few minutes later. "The auction has been halted," the beta said. Draven did not turn. "Investigate who is behind this," Kaelor nodded. "And the Omega who escaped." Draven was silent for a moment. Finally he spoke. "Find her." Kaelor looked at the Alpha King. "You want to bring her back?" Draven shook his head slightly. "No." He looked out at the dark forest in the distance. "I only want to know who she is." Kaelor nodded. "I will send men to search." But as Kaelor prepared to leave, Draven suddenly added, "Wait." Kaelor stopped. "What is it?" "My lord." Draven still gazed into the night. Then he spoke a sentence that made Kaelor freeze. "That girl is no ordinary Omega." Kaelor frowned. "What do you mean?" Draven was silent for several seconds. In his mind, he recalled the moment she stood in his room, eyes panicked, yet without the familiar scent of fear from an Omega overwhelmed by an Alpha. There was only that gentle, enchanting fragrance. Finally, Draven said, "I have never met an Omega with a scent like that." Kaelor did not answer, for they both understood what that could mean. If Draven was right, then the girl who had just fled the manor might be more than just an ordinary Omega, and somewhere in the darkness of the forest, Nysera was entirely unaware that the Alpha King of the entire territory had begun to search for her. Part II, the King's Obsession. Chapter 7. The Alpha King Cannot Forget. A few days after the night at the manor, dawn had just begun to break over the Alpha King's territory. The distant mountain ranges were still submerged in a thin mist, and the early daylight poured down onto the stone fortress where Draeven ruled over the entirety of these lands. The Alpha King's fortress was unlike the lavish manors of other packs. It was built as a bastion of war, with high stone walls, silent watchtowers, and cold paved paths leading to the central Great Hall. This was no place for banquets. It was a place for power. Draeven stood on the fortress's highest balcony, looking down at the training grounds below. The pack's warriors had been practicing since before sunrise, the clashing of metal echoing through the cold morning air. But Draeven was not truly watching them. In his mind, the image of the girl who had entered his room the other night remained. A stranger Omega, an Omega who had opened the wrong door, a door no one in the territory dared to touch. Draeven had never thought he would remember an Omega for this long, but that scent had not yet completely vanished from his memory. It was like an invisible thread, gently winding itself around his mind. Draeven slightly tightened his grip on the cold stone railing. He did not like, nor was he accustomed to, this kind of sensation. An Alpha King should not concern himself with such trivial matters. Footsteps echoed behind him. "My Alpha King." Draeven did not turn. He knew who was approaching. Kaelor stopped a few paces behind him. "We have checked all the paths leading away from the manor that night," the Beta said, but no one saw that Omega. Draeven remained silent as the morning breeze brushed past the balcony, carrying the scent of damp grass and deep forest. "She fled into the woods," Kaelor continued, "and if so, perhaps she has already left our territory." Draeven finally turned, his golden gaze calm but cold, without revealing even the slightest flicker of hesitation. "No." Kaelor frowned. "My lord, she is still within the territory." Kaelor watched the Alpha King for a moment. "Why are you so certain?" Draeven did not answer immediately. He turned back to look at the forest, stretching to the horizon. Then he spoke slowly. "Because if she had left the territory, I would no longer sense that scent." Kaelor fell silent. He had served Draeven long enough to know the Alpha King rarely spoke of things he was not certain of. Yet this still felt strange to him. An anonymous Omega, and yet Draeven remembered her scent. "Do you want us to continue searching for her?" Kaelor asked. Draeven turned to walk into the Great Hall. "No." Kaelor was slightly surprised. No public search." Draeven stepped past the massive stone pillars of the hall, his shadow stretching across the cold floor. "The other packs are still in my territory," he said. "If they know I am searching for an Omega who escaped the auction." He did not finish the sentence, but Kaelor understood. It would pique the curiosity of the other packs, and curiosity always led to trouble. "Then what do you wish to do?" Kaelor asked. Draeven stopped before the large table in the center of the hall. On the table was a map of his entire territory. Deep forests, villages, trade routes, and areas under the control of smaller packs. Draeven placed his hand on the map. "Send our men to the villages at the edge of the forest." Kaelor looked at him. In secret. Draeven lifted his head. "And if you find her?" Kaelor waited for the answer. Draeven was silent for a few seconds. In his mind, the image of the girl standing in the middle of his room surfaced again, eyes panicked, yet possessing enough courage to open the door and run. Finally, he spoke. "Bring her to me." Kaelor nodded, but before leaving, he paused for a moment. "My Alpha King." Draeven looked at him. Kaelor spoke slowly. "Have you ever ordered a search for an Omega like this before?" Draeven did not answer. The morning light streamed through the hall's large windows, and in that fleeting moment, even Draeven realized a truth he did not want to admit. He truly wanted to find that girl, because throughout these past days, he still could not forget that moonlight-like scent. Chapter 8. The Manhunter. 3 days after the night of the escape, the northern forest of the territory stretched endlessly, with towering ancient trees obscuring nearly all sunlight. Only thin, fragile streaks of light pierced through the dense canopy, falling upon the damp earth and the tangled roots beneath. Nysera had been walking for nearly 3 days. Her thin shoes had torn at the heels. Her dress was caked with mud and dried leaves. She dared not stop for long anywhere, taking only brief rests against large tree trunks before continuing her journey. She did not know where she was in this vast forest, but she knew one thing. She had to get as far from that manor as possible. Nysera stopped by a small stream, the water running ice-cold over moss-covered stones. She knelt, cupping some water to her lips. The chill offered slight relief to her parched throat, She had just stood up when a sharp sound echoed behind her. A snapping branch. Nysera stiffened. She turned her head slowly, seeing nothing at first but the dark trunks and the shadows of the deep woods. Then, a voice rang out from among the trees. "I told you." A man stepped out from behind a massive trunk. Dark leather coat, cold eyes, and a smile that Nysera recognized instantly. One of the guards who had stood watch at the manor. Behind him, 2 other men emerged from the forest shadows. They had found her. Nysera took a step back. "This little girl ran quite far," another man chuckled. "If we sell her again, we will earn even more." The first man looked Nysera up and down. "Alphas pay a high price for omegas like this." He took another step. Nysera turned and ran. She lunged into the woods, through low bushes and over fallen logs. Her breath quickly grew frantic as heavy footsteps thudded behind her. "Catch her!" A shout rang out. Nysera dared not look back. She only ran. Branches whipped against her arms and face. Roots protruding beneath the dried leaves caused her to nearly stumble several times, yet the footsteps behind her drew ever closer. Do not let her run deeper. A hand nearly brushed her shoulder. In a panic, Nysera veered into a narrow path between large boulders. The narrow trail led deeper into a darker part of the forest, where sunlight had almost vanished entirely. She ran a few more steps, then skidded to a halt. Before her was a low, moss-covered cliff. There was no other way. Nysera turned around. The 3 men had stepped out from the forest shadows behind her. One of them laughed. "Enough running." He approached. "This time, you will not escape again." Nysera backed away until her spine hit the cold cliff face. Her heart pounded frantically in her chest. And just as the manhunter took another step, a different sound echoed from behind them. Footsteps slow, calm, as if the person were in no hurry at all. The 3 traffickers turned their heads. Nysera looked on as well. Amidst the tall trunks of the forest, a figure was stepping out from the darkness. Chapter 9. The Second Encounter. The 3 manhunters turned their heads simultaneously. Amidst the towering trunks of the forest, a figure was stepping out from the darkness. Faint light piercing through the canopy fell upon his shoulders, revealing a tall physique and a slow, composed stride. The man was in no hurry, emerging from the forest shadows as if he had already known exactly what was transpiring here. The man standing closest to Nysera scowled. "Who goes there?" he barked. There was no answer. The figure took another step, the light sliding over his sharp features and those familiar golden eyes. Nysera held her breath. She recognized him instantly. Alpha King Draeven. The 3 manhunters realized it too. The smiles on their faces vanished immediately. Alpha King," one stammered. None of them had expected Draeven to appear in the middle of this forest. Draeven halted a few paces from them. His golden gaze swept over the 3 men before settling on Nysera, who stood braced against the cliff. In that moment, the entire forest seemed to plunge into silence. A light breeze brushed through the leaves above. The leader swallowed hard. We did not know you were nearby, my lord." Draeven did not answer. He took another step. That single step alone was enough to make the 2 men in the back recoil by instinct. The leader tried to maintain his composure. "This Omega escaped from the auction," he spoke quickly. "We were only bringing her back." He did not finish his sentence. Draeven struck. Everything happened so fast that Nysera could barely see it clearly. A lightning-fast movement, a heavy impact, and the leader was hurled aside. His body slammed hard against a tree trunk before crashing to the ground. The remaining 2 immediately drew their knives, but they only managed a single step forward. Draeven advanced, faster, stronger. A strike sent the knife flying from one man's hand. The other retreated several paces. Eyes panicked as he realized whom he was facing. Without needing another word of warning, both turned and fled into the woods. Within a few breaths, the forest returned to stillness. The first man still lay motionless on the earth. Nysera stood pressed against the cliff, her heart still racing wildly in her chest. She looked at Draeven, still unable to believe that the person who had just saved her was the Alpha King himself. Draeven turned back to look at her, his golden gaze calm and unruffled, as if nothing of significance had just occurred. Nysera struggled to say something. Thank you, my lord." But her voice was so weak it was nearly inaudible. Draeven stepped closer. Nysera instinctively backed away, her spine hitting the cold cliff. The distance between them was only a few paces. Draeven stopped, and in that moment he frowned slightly. A familiar scent drifted through the air, still that very light fragrance, pure and gentle like moonlight. Draeven stood still, his gaze lingering on Nysera's face. 3 nights ago, in his room, there had been this exact scent. Draeven spoke softly. "It is you." Nysera looked up, not understanding what he meant. Just then, a figure stepped out from behind the trees. Kalor. Nysera startled. She had not even realized the Alpha King's beta had been nearby this whole time. Kalor cast her a glance, then turned to Draeven. "My Alpha King." Draeven reached out, as if wanting to touch her, but he halted in midair, then lowered his hand. He spoke curtly. "Take her out of the territory." Nysera stiffened. "What?" Draeven looked at her, his voice deep and resolute. "You cannot remain in my territory." Nysera was stunned. She had been hunted for days, and the man who had just saved her was telling her to leave immediately. "But Draeven did not let her finish. "If those men find you again," he said coldly, "I will not be there to save you." Nysera fell silent. She knew he was right. Kalor stepped forward. "We will take you to the edge of the territory before dawn." Nysera looked at Draeven once more. She did not know what to say. This man had just saved her life, and immediately after he was casting her out. Draeven said nothing more. He turned his back to the forest. The moonlight shining on his shoulders made him appear taller, yet also more solitary and cold. Kalor signaled for Nysera to follow. She took a few steps, then paused. In that moment, Draeven suddenly turned his head. His golden gaze rested on her for only a second. Then he turned away. Nysera did not know that in Draeven's mind at that moment, a question remained. Why was her scent identical to the scent in his room 3 nights ago? But Draeven also knew one thing. Whoever this girl was, she should not stay in his territory. Chapter 10. The King's Betrothal. The Alpha King's fortress was never silent, even in days devoid of war. The council hall remained filled with meetings, agreements, and debates among the territory's major pacts. That morning, the atmosphere within the council chamber was particularly strained. Long tables of black wood were arranged in an arc around the vast stone room. Upon the walls hung the banners of the great pacts, and at the far end of the hall stood the emblem of the Alpha King, a crowned wolf beneath a full moon. Draeven sat in the highest seat, sunlight from the high windows pouring down onto the stone table before him. The Alpha King's expression remained as unruffled as ever. Yet the Alphas seated around the table knew that a meeting such as this rarely occurred without a matter of grave importance. A silver-haired Alpha stood first. "Your territory has been peaceful for many years," he said, "but other packs are beginning to observe us." Another Alpha nodded. "The southern territories are forming alliances. If we do not fortify our strength, they may test you." Draeven said nothing. He merely looked at those seated around the table. "There is a simple way to consolidate the Alpha King's power," the silver-haired Alpha continued. Several people in the room nodded as if they had already anticipated this. "The territory needs a Luna." The air in the room fell silent for a few seconds. This was not the first time the issue had been raised. Another Alpha spoke. "A Luna from a powerful pack would create a steadfast alliance between territories." Another added, "And it also proves that the Alpha King does not stand alone." Every gaze in the room turned toward Draeven. The Alpha King remained still. He showed no sign of agreement, yet neither did he protest. The silver-haired Alpha continued, "Our pack wishes to propose a name." He turned his head toward the council room doors. Luna Seraphine. The massive doors at the rear of the room slowly opened. A woman stepped inside. She was tall and ethereal, her long silver hair falling down her back like moonlight. A white cloak draped over her shoulders, and her gaze was calm as she walked through the room filled with powerful Alphas. No one in the room could deny one thing. Luna Seraphine was one of the strongest Lunas of the northern packs. If this union occurred, it would alter the entire balance of power in the territory. Seraphine halted before the council table. She bowed her head slightly toward Draeven, the Alpha King. Draeven looked at her, his golden gaze betraying no emotion whatsoever. One of the Alphas spoke. "This marriage will bring stability to the entire territory." Another said, "And it will reinforce the alliance between packs." The room fell silent. All were waiting for Draeven's response. The Alpha King said nothing for several seconds. Finally he spoke. "I will consider it. Not an agreement, but not a rejection either." For the Alphas in the room, that was a sufficient signal. A few began to exchange small remarks. The meeting seemed to have reached its conclusion. But in that moment, Luna Seraphine suddenly tilted her head slightly. She took another step closer to Draeven. A light breeze brushed through the open window behind him. Seraphine stopped, her silver gaze shifting subtly. She spoke softly, almost a whisper. "This scent." The entire room plunged into silence. Seraphine looked at Draeven. "Have you encountered an Omega recently?" Several alphas in the room immediately glanced at one another. That question was not what they expected. Draeven did not answer immediately, his golden gaze calmly watching the Luna before him. "Irrelevant to this meeting," he said curtly. Seraphine said no more, but her eyes continued to observe Draeven for a few seconds longer before she stepped back. The meeting quickly ended after that, the alphas leaving the council chamber in small groups. Only Draeven remained, standing alone before the large window. Daylight shone down upon the fortress and the distant forest on the horizon. A political marriage, a powerful Luna, an alliance between packs. That was what every alpha in the territory expected from the position of an alpha king. It was the duty and responsibility of the sovereign. His calm golden gaze flickered with a slight agitation, growing deeper and colder. Yet in Draven's mind at that moment, a scent familiar to him for many days surfaced, drifting through his thoughts vague and unnameable, like moonlight hidden behind a thin layer of clouds. Still there, lingering in his mind yet out of reach. It was the scent of the girl he had just cast out of the territory hours ago, and though Draeven did not wish to admit it, he had absolutely no way to forget it. Chapter 11. The Invisible Thread. The path leading away from the Alpha King's territory stretched through the forest, winding between towering ancient trees. The afternoon sun was obstructed by the dense canopy, leaving only fragile streaks of light to fall upon the cold, damp earth. Kalor led the way, his stride steady, neither slow nor hurried. Nysera followed behind. The distance between them was not great, yet it was not close enough to offer a sense of security. They did not speak. The silence stretched out as a part of the forest itself. But within Nysera, there was no stillness. She walked, but each step grew a bit heavier. It was not because of the ache in her legs after days of flight, but because of a peculiar sensation clinging to her, a feeling as though she were moving away from something she did not wish to let go of. Nysera turned her head slightly. Behind them, the woods stretched endlessly. Further still, beyond the layers of overlapping leaves, was the place where the Alpha King's fortress stood imposing amidst the territory. She could not see it, but she knew it was there, and with it was the man she could not stop thinking about. Draeven, that name used to terrify her, a tyrant, a cold alpha, a king whom no one dared to oppose. Nysera had once believed all those things, until she met him. Not once, but twice. The first time, in a room drenched in moonlight, where he could have killed her instantly. The second time, amidst the dark forest when she was cornered with no way out. Both times, he had saved her. Nysera slightly clenched her hands. A light breeze brushed through the woods, carrying the scent of damp earth and dried leaves. And in that moment, she froze. Something was still lingering within her. Not distinct, not powerful, but enough for her to recognize. It was his scent. Unlike the smell of other alphas, heavy and overpowering, Draeven's scent was deeper, more profound, like a layer of quiet shadow beneath the moonlight. And strangely, it did not frighten her. On the contrary, it soothed her chest, as if merely sensing it meant she no longer needed to fear being hunted. Nysera closed her eyes for a brief beat. She should not feel this way. Not toward an alpha, and certainly not toward the Alpha King. Yet when she thought of him, her heart beat faster, not from fear, but from another sensation, one that left her disconcerted. Kalor stopped ahead. "You should walk faster," he said, his voice deep but not cold. Nysera opened her eyes and gave a slight nod. Then she continued to walk, but this time, she could not stop herself from turning her head once more. The forest remained the same. Nothing had changed. No one was behind her. But that feeling was still there. A very slight pull, not strong, not clear, but enough to make her realize. Nysera placed a hand over her chest. Her heart beat faster. Not from exhaustion, not from fear, but because of something that was forming. An invisible thread, unseen and unnameable. Yet it pulled at her persistently, drawing her backward toward the territory, toward the fortress, toward the man she should have stayed away from. Nysera bit her lips slightly. The image of Draeven surfaced in her mind again. The cold, golden gaze, the low voice. "Run." Then, "You cannot remain in my territory." A pang of bitterness seeped into her chest. He had saved her twice, but he was also the one who pushed her away. Nysera did not understand. She did not understand how one person could be both the most terrifying figure and the only person who made her feel safe. She did not understand why she thought of him so much. And she understood even less why. The more she tried to forget, the more she could not. Kalor continued walking ahead without turning back, but he slowed down slightly. as if he knew Nysera was not keeping up not with her footsteps, but with her thoughts. Nysera took a deep breath and continued on. But the feeling did not vanish. On the contrary, it became clearer, no longer just a fleeting moment, but a presence as light as moonlight, that was not just shining down but touching her. Nysera shivered slightly. She did not know what was happening. She did not know why her body reacted this way. She did not know why a part of her did not want to leave that place. But there was one thing Nysera began to realize. Though she was leaving the Alpha King's territory, though the distance between them grew further, she was not truly leaving him. That invisible thread still existed, still pulling her back. And for the first time in her life, Nysera realized that the thing she feared most was not the Alpha King. It was the fact that she could not stop thinking about him. Chapter 12. Conspiracy in the Shadows. Night descended upon the Alpha King's fortress in an unusual stillness. Inside the strategic hall, the light from torches flickered against the stone walls, casting long and distorted shadows. Upon the massive table in the center of the room lay a map of the entire territory, alongside notes gathered from the auction a few nights prior. Draeven stood there, not sitting, not speaking, only watching. Kaelor stood opposite him, hands placed on the edge of the table, his gaze focused. "We have checked the records," the beta said. "All Omegas brought to the auction had clear profiles." Draeven did not react. Kaelor continued. "No one was of unknown origin." A silence passed. Then Draeven asked, his voice deep, "Then who is she?" Kaelor did not answer immediately. He flipped a page on the table. No name, no record, no sign of prior registration. Kaelor looked up. She did not exist in the auction. The flickering flames danced across Draven's face. He showed no surprise, only a slightly longer silence. In his mind, the moment in his chambers 3 nights ago surfaced. A door opened by mistake, an Omega who should not have been there, a scent that belonged to no one on the list. Draeven slowly placed his hand on the map. How many packs participated in that auction? 3 major packs, Kaelor answered instantly, and at least 7 rogue alphas. Draeven frowned slightly. Too many. An ordinary black market auction would never attract that many alphas. Kaelor seemed to realize this as well. "We also found this anomalous," he said. "Several alphas moved through the territory without prior notice." Draeven remained silent, his gaze sweeping over the map. 3 major packs, 1 auction, 1 nameless Omega. The pieces began to fit together. But one thing was still missing. Draven lifted his head. The other Omegas. Kaelor understood at once. "We interrogated a few before they were taken away," he said. "No one knew that girl. No one saw her before the auction commenced." A long silence stretched, the fire in the hall shivering slightly. Draven spoke slowly. "She was not a part of the auction." Kaelor frowned slightly. "Then how did she get there?" Draven did not answer that question. He turned his back to the table. Moonlight from the high window streamed into the room, cutting through the darkness. In his mind, everything began to grow clearer. Too many alphas, an unusual auction, an Omega who did not exist on the list. Draven said, "They did not come to buy Omegas." Kaelor was silent. Draven continued, "They came to test me." No further words were needed. Both understood what that implied. Kaelor tightened his grip. "If it is a trap, then what is their objective?" he asked. Draven turned back. His golden gaze turned cold. "My reaction." Kaelor stiffened. A possibility quickly surfaced in his mind. "If an Omega slipped into your room," Draven looked at him, "and I kill her," he said, "or keep her, or mark her. Each choice leads to consequences, politics, alliances, war." Draven slowly continued. "They wanted to see what I would do." Kaelor was silent. A chill ran down his spine. "Then that girl." Kaelor spoke softly. Draven did not look at him. His gaze halted on the space ahead. She was not the target. A pause. She was the bait. The fire in the hall suddenly flared up. That statement fell into the room like an irrevocable conclusion. Kaelor took a deep breath. "So, if their plan failed," Draven cut him off, "they will try again." Kaelor looked at him. In another way, a heavy silence enveloped the room. Then Kaelor said, "We need to find that girl." Draven did not answer immediately. In his mind, Nysera's image appeared clearer than ever. Her gaze, her breath, her scent. But this time it was no longer just a fading memory. It was clearer, deeper, like moonlight that was not just passing by, but lingering. Draven frowned slightly, a very light sensation flickering in his chest. Not anger, not curiosity, but something he did not like. He said, "Find her." Kaelor nodded. "Yes, my Alpha King." But just as Kaelor prepared to leave, Draeven spoke again. "Wait." Kaelor stopped. Draeven looked out the window. Darkness shrouded the forest. Then he spoke, his voice even deeper. "If she is a part of the trap." He paused for a second, 2 seconds, then continued. "Then she is in danger right now." Kaelor said nothing, for both understood what that meant. And somewhere in the night out there, Nysera had no idea she had never truly escaped that auction. She had only just entered a far more perilous game, part of the destiny beneath the moonlight. Chapter 13. The enemy's hostage. Only minutes before Kaelor was set to depart, Kaelor halted at the forest's edge. "This is the boundary of the territory," he said curtly. "From here, you must go on alone." Nysera nodded slightly. "Thank you." Without another word, Kaelor turned his back. Within a few steps, his silhouette merged into the dark trunks and vanished. Nysera stood alone. The silence fell upon her faster than she could realize. She took a breath, intending to move forward. Then, the familiar sensation in her chest abruptly disappeared, like a thread that had just been severed. Nysera froze, her heart skipping a beat. A cold void expanded within her. No. Before she could understand what was happening, a hand gripped her wrist from behind. Before Nysera could cry out, a piece of cloth was clamped over her mouth. "Do not scream." The voice was icy, right against her ear. Figures emerged from every direction. Fast, silent, precise. These were not traffickers. Nysera struggled in vain. A rough cloth with a strange herbal scent covered half her face. The world began to tilt. Sounds faded into a blur. Before her consciousness sank entirely into the abyss, she heard a single sentence: "Keep her alive. The Alpha King will need this girl." Then, darkness rushed in, quickly devouring everything. When Nysera regained consciousness, there was no moonlight, no forest, only a cold stone room. Her wrists were locked in iron shackles, the freezing metal biting into her skin. The surrounding air was heavy and damp, carrying the scent of stone and rusted iron. Nysera moved slightly but could not break free. She breathed deeply, struggling to maintain her composure. Footsteps echoed from the shadows, slow, deliberate. A person stepped forward. His face was not clearly revealed, only cold eyes reflecting the weak torchlight. Finally awake, Nysera clenched her hands, keeping her voice from trembling. "Who are you?" The person did not answer immediately. He only observed her as if weighing the value of an object. "You do not need to know." A pause. Then he continued. "You only need to know that you are very important." Nysera frowned. "To whom?" The person tilted his head slightly. A faint smile appeared in the darkness. "To the Alpha King." Nysera stiffened. "Impossible." She did not have time to finish. "He will come," the person said, his voice certain. "And this time, he will not be able to stand aside." At the same moment, inside his fortress, Draeven abruptly stopped in the middle of the corridor. There was no unusual noise, no one calling him. But something had just disappeared, a very light sensation that had existed in his chest all this time. Now it was gone. Draeven tightened his grip. The black-silver ring reflected the torchlight. A fleeting irritation passed through him, not distinct, but enough to make him halt. "Kaelor," his voice rang out. The beta appeared instantly. "My Alpha King." Draeven did not look at him. His gaze was fixed on the distant forest beyond the fortress. "Something is not right." Kaelor remained silent. Draeven spoke slowly. "She," a pause, "has met with trouble." Kaelor understood immediately. "We will." "No." Draeven cut him off. His voice was lower, colder. "This time, I will go myself." The night wind swept through the stone corridor, and somewhere in the darkness, a hunt had just commenced. Chapter 14. The Tyrant's Wrath. The night had not yet passed, but the entire fortress had awakened. Hurried footsteps echoed throughout the long, cold stone corridors. Heavy doors swung open incessantly as guards were summoned in silence. No one questioned what was occurring, for everyone sensed something clearer than any command. The Alpha King was furious. Draeven stood in the center of the great hall, not seated upon his throne, not moving, merely standing. Yet his presence made the air in the room so heavy that no one dared to breathe deeply. Torchlight cast sharp, cold highlights and shadows across his face, and his golden eyes did not flicker. Kaelor entered, halting a few paces from him. "We have received a signal from the border," he said quickly, yet keeping his voice low. "There are signs of a struggle, not traffickers, but trained warriors." Draven remained standing still. But within his chest, something was tightening. It was not a distinct pain, not a wound. It was merely a sensation of irritation, vague yet persistently weighing upon his chest, as if something had just been torn away from him. Draven clenched his hands. How long? Not more than an hour. A brief silence passed. Then Draven spoke, his voice low and cold. "Have every patrol unit scour the entire territory. Do not miss a single area." Kaelor nodded immediately. "Yes." Draven turned his head, his golden gaze sharpening like a blade in the darkness. "Anyone who stands in the way." He paused for a beat. "Kill." No one in the hall protested. No one questioned. The command was issued, and everyone understood. This was no longer a search, but a hunt. An hour later, a man was dragged down to his knees in the center of the fortress courtyard. His hands were bound, his face smeared with blood and dust. He trembled not from the cold, but because the person standing before him was the most ruthless Alpha King, Draven. The Alpha King said nothing. He only watched, a gaze that seemed to freeze the surrounding air. "You know where she is." It was not a question. The man swallowed hard. I do not know." Before he could finish, Draven moved fast, without warning. One hand constricted his throat, hoisting him off the ground. The man's body struggled in desperation, his legs kicking wildly in the air. "I do not ask a second time." Draven's voice was so low it was nearly a whisper, but it was cold enough to steal one's breath. "Where is she?" The man trembled, his voice breaking. "To the east. An old base. We only took orders." Before he could finish, Draven released him. His body slumped to the earth, motionless. Draven turned his back. "Prepare the horses." Kaelor stepped forward. "Are you intending to go alone?" Draven did not stop. "No, but I will arrive first." Kaelor understood. No one could keep pace with the Alpha King when he truly intended to move. The night wind swept through the forest as Draven moved like a shadow. Fast, precise, without hesitation. Every stride carried a single objective. Find her. Not for politics. Not for a conspiracy. But for something even he could not name. A sharp pang flickered through his chest. Draven faltered for a fleeting moment. Only a moment. Then he continued. He had walked through hundreds of battles, had faced death, yet never before had he felt this loss of control. The sensation was not clear. It had no shape, but it pulled him forward, stronger than reason, stronger than power. As if a powerful, invisible thread were guiding him, Draven tightened his grip, his gaze darkening. "If she is injured." He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. The rage within him was clear enough. The wind shrieked through the canopies. His shadow glided through the forest like a storm. No one could obstruct him. Rather, no one dared. And somewhere in the darkness, a certainty was drawing near. Draven would find her. It was not a promise, but an irrevocable truth. Even if he had to burn this entire territory to the ground, he would find her. Chapter 15. The Awakening of the Mate Bond. The darkness within the stone chamber was thick and heavy, as if the air itself were pressing down upon Nysera's chest. There were no windows, no natural light, only the flickering torches on the walls, casting a wavering glow that made everything appear distorted and cold. Both her wrists remained locked in iron shackles. The freezing metal bit into her flesh, each movement dragging a dull, burning ache along her skin. Yet that pain was not what disturbed her most. It was the hollow void within her chest. The invisible thread that had once existed, pulling her toward a man she did not understand, had completely vanished. There was no longer a sense of being drawn, no longer that vague presence. Only a cold silence remained, as if something that ought to be there had been stripped away. Nysera closed her eyes, struggling to keep her breathing steady. A part of her knew this was wrong. The heavy sound of a stone door swinging open shattered the silence. A brighter light flooded in, forcing her to squint. That man stepped inside, his stride still slow, his gaze still cold as if he were looking at an object. "You are still conscious," he said, his voice flat. Nysera did not answer. She only watched him, fighting to keep her gaze from trembling. He drew closer. "A pity," he continued. "We need you alive." A pause, but not necessarily intact. Nysera clenched her hands. "What do you want?" He did not answer, merely gesturing. Two others entered. One of them held a short blade. The air in the room suddenly chilled. Nysera stiffened. Stop. Too late. The blade cut into her shoulder. Pain erupted instantly, sharp, hot, and spreading like wildfire beneath her skin. Nysera's breath caught in her throat. A fractured sound escaped her lips before she could suppress it. Blood began to trail down her arm, drop by drop, onto the cold stone floor. The man observed it all without emotion. Merely to send a message, he said, to the Alpha King. Amidst the dark forest, Draeven abruptly halted. There was no warning sound, no external sign, but a pang of agony tore through his chest, sudden, sharp as a blade, as if something had touched him from afar. Yet so clearly it was undeniable. Draeven clenched his fists. His breathing slowed, but his golden eyes immediately darkened. No. He did not understand why he said it, but he knew. She was in pain. It was not a guess, not a premonition, but a truth manifesting within his own body. That sensation was no longer vague as before. It was no longer a fleeting moment hard to grasp. It was clear, powerful like a thread that had just been pulled taut to its limit. Draeven pressed on, faster, stronger, no longer in control. The forest blurred past him like torn patches of shadow. Everything became a blur, except for a single direction, the place where she was being held. Inside the stone room, Nysera gasped for air. The pain was still there, but amidst all that chaos, something else began to emerge. Faint, yet as distinct as a ray of light piercing through a dense night. Nysera froze. Her breath slowed for a brief beat. That feeling, it had returned. But it was no longer the same as before. It was no longer fragile, no longer easily dissipated. Instead, it was deeper, clearer, like a surge of warmth spreading from her chest, touching every breath. Nysera opened her eyes, and in that moment, she sensed him. Not a memory, not an imagination, but a true presence, far away, yet drawing near. Something so swift it seemed unstoppable. That sensation was no longer a scent drifting in the wind. It was clearer, like moonlight pouring onto the earth after the clouds have parted, no longer hidden, no longer obstructed. Nysera shivered slightly. Draeven. She did not know why she called his name, but it escaped her like a natural reflex, as if it had always been there. The man before her frowned. What did you say? Nysera did not answer, because a part of her was no longer in this room. Draeven stopped, not out of exhaustion, but because he felt it. Clear, unmistakable. It was her, Nysera. For the first time, it was no longer a trace, no longer a fleeting sensation. It was a true connection, an invisible thread that could be neither seen nor severed. Draeven lifted his head, his golden eyes igniting with flashes of light in the darkness. Finally, he spoke softly, then moved again, faster, as if nothing could stop him now. The mate bond had officially awakened, and this time, no one could pull her away from him. Chapter 16. Secrets of the Past. The night wind sliced through the forest like cold blades. Draeven moved incessantly. The canopies blurred past him into streaks of shadow. The ground beneath his feet had almost lost its meaning. He needed no map, no trail. He only had to follow that sensation. The invisible thread between them had awakened, no longer vague, no longer severed. It pulled him forward clearly, resolutely. She was there. He knew it. Yet the closer he drew, the more familiar the sensation in his chest became. It was not merely a connection, not just the agony of her injury. It was something deeper, as if he had felt this once before. Draeven faltered for an instant, just a tiny beat. The wind brushed past, carrying the scent of the night forest and something else. Very faint, yet enough to make him stand still. Not the scent of blood, nor of fear. It was a sensation of clarity, fragile, like light piercing through the darkness. Not brilliant, yet impossible to ignore. Draeven clenched his hands. He had felt this sensation. Once, a very long time ago. Darkness, a searing pain. His body lay upon the cold earth, his breath heavy and disjointed. Silver poison corroded every vein. Each breath grew more difficult, as if every inhalation dragged a blade across his chest. He was dying. Draeven remembered it clearly. No one was there, no protecting warriors, no beta, no one at all, save for a faint silhouette. A girl, her face unclear. He remembered only small, trembling hands as they touched him. Not from fear, not from hesitation, but with a very quiet determination. Do not die. That voice was very soft, yet it had always remained in his mind. A fleeting scent, not distinct, not powerful, A warm hand placed upon his chest, very light, yet it was enough to make him retain a sliver of consciousness, to hold on to a breath, to hold on to life. Draven opened his eyes, returning to the present. But the sensation did not vanish. It joined the past and the present into an undeniable line. He took a breath, the cold air flooding his lungs, and with it, the feeling became clearer, no longer a memory, but a truth. Draven stood still, his golden gaze darkening. Every piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The girl in the forest that year, the scent he could not forget, the presence he felt now, all of it was one. Draven spoke softly. "It is you, not a question, not a speculation, but a truth. A truth he should have realized long ago." Inside the cold stone room, Nysera moved slightly. The pain remained, yet it no longer occupied her entire mind. For that thread had returned, stronger, clearer, as if someone were drawing near, very near. Nysera closed her eyes. Vague images flickered past. A forest, an injured man, blood, so much blood. She knelt, her hands trembling. But she did not stop. She had done something, but she could not remember clearly. She only remembered the feeling then, not fear, but the inability to leave him behind. Nysera opened her eyes, her heart beating faster. Not from pain, but from something gradually becoming clear. Yet before she could grasp it, the stone door opened once more. Footsteps, that man had returned, but this time, Nysera no longer felt entirely alone. For she knew, he was coming. In the darkness of the forest, Draven pressed on faster, stronger, no hesitation, nothing left to doubt. The person he was seeking was not only his mate, she was the one who had pulled him back from the brink of death years ago. And this time, he would not let her disappear again. Chapter 17. Night of the Alpha King. The iron door shattered. The sound reverberated through the cold stone base, sharp as a blade severing the night. The guards had no time to react before being hurled aside, as if a storm had suddenly lunged from the shadows. Draven stepped inside, not rushing, not frantic, yet every stride made the air in the room grow heavy enough to suffocate. No one spoke. More accurately, no one dared. For everyone understood the Alpha King had arrived, and this time, he had not come to negotiate. "So you finally appear," a voice rang out from deep within. The mastermind stepped out from the darkness, his gaze cold yet unable to conceal his tension. "We wondered how long it would take for you to find this place." Draven did not look at him. His gaze swept across the room and halted. Nysera. She was bound, injured. Blood still stained her skin. Everything else around him vanished. No more enemies, no more conspiracies, there was only her. A constriction tightened around his chest. It was not just rage. More precisely, it was something deeper, more perilous. Draven pressed on, slow yet unstoppable. "You should stop," the other man spoke, struggling to keep his voice steady. "You know what we can do to her." He did not finish his sentence. Draven materialized before him. So fast it was a blur. One hand constricted his throat, hoisting him off the ground. No warning, no hesitation. "You have touched her." His voice resonated, deep and low. But it was cold enough to freeze one's blood. The man struggled. "You do not understand. This is not just an omega." Draven tightened his grip. "I understand perfectly." A dry snap echoed. The man's body fell in silence. No one else dared to move. No one dared to breathe. Draven released his hold, not glancing back for even a second. He turned immediately. And this time, he walked toward her. Nysera looked at him, her breathing unsteady. The pain remained. But as he drew near, it was as if he brought a warmth that helped everything soothe. The thread between them was no longer pulled taut. It was embracing. Draven stopped before her, the distance minimal. Yet for the first time, Draven did not step forward immediately. A peculiar sensation held him back. Not hesitation, but a desire not to frighten her. His hand reached out as if to touch her, to touch where the wound still seeped blood, but his hand halted in midair. Only a tiny gap remained, as if he knew that with a single touch, everything would change. Nysera did not recoil, did not fear. She only watched him and waited. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then Draven touched her, very lightly, as if she might break if he were any stronger. His fingers brushed her bound wrists. His gaze darkened as he saw the injury. A flash of rage passed, but it vanished instantly, leaving only caution. The iron shackles were snapped. No loud noise, only a force strong enough, yet restrained. Nysera tilted slightly toward him, very subtle, yet enough for him to notice. Draven paused for a beat, then reached out to support her, not clutching, not possessing, but simply holding her close, as if that was where she belonged. "I am here." His voice was very low, intended only for her. Nysera closed her eyes, not from exhaustion, but because for the first time, she did not have to stand against everything alone. Outside, footsteps echoed. Draven's soldiers had arrived, but no one needed to give orders, no one needed direction, for the battle had concluded the moment he stepped inside. Draven did not look back, indifferent to those who remained. He lifted Nysera, as carefully as if she were more important than anything else. As he turned to leave, no one dared to obstruct him. No one could. And in that moment, it was not the Alpha King leaving a battlefield. It was a man who had found the one he would never let go of again. Chapter 18. The Chosen of the Moon. The night had not yet concluded when Draven brought Nysera back to the fortress. But this time, it was no ordinary night. News spread across the territory faster than the wind. The Alpha King had personally led his forces. A secret base had been obliterated, and he was bringing back an Omega. No one spoke it aloud, yet everyone understood that something was changing. The Great Hall was illuminated once more, the Alphas summoned in haste, not to deliberate, but to witness. The doors swung open, and Draven stepped inside, slow, resolute. Nysera walked beside him, though longer bound, no longer dragged along. Instead, she was being escorted. The entire hall fell silent. Every gaze settled upon her. An Omega, injured yet standing tall, and most importantly, standing by his side. Draven stepped forward, then halted. But this time, he did not look at the Alphas immediately. He turned, looking at Nysera. It was only a fleeting moment, yet enough for everyone to realize this was not politics. His hand rose, pausing in midair, only a tiny fraction from her. Nysera did not recoil, did not evade. She simply stood there and waited. Then he touched her, very lightly, as if she were not a fragile Omega, but the only thing he refused to harm. His fingers gently tilted her chin, his gaze lowering. It was no longer the look of a king. It was that of a man who had just reclaimed something lost long ago. "You desired a Luna." His voice rang out deep, clear, and full of conviction. No one dared to interrupt. "You wanted me to choose." His gaze swept across the entire hall. Then he turned back to her. "I do not choose." A pause. The thread between them tightened, not with pain, but with a searing heat. "I recognize," he said. And this time, no one understood the weight of those words better than Nysera. Draven drew her closer, not with force or coercion, but just enough to erase the distance between them. Their breaths mingled, very close, yet he did not kiss her immediately. That space was held for a beat, as if both knew that with just one more step, everything would change forever. Nysera watched him intently, her gaze unmoving, and for the first time she did not want to run. "This is my mate," Draven's voice resonated. It was not loud, yet it was enough to flood the hall. No one protested, for they all knew that no one could. One Alpha took half a step forward but stopped when he met Draven's eyes. It was not rage, but something far more perilous. Draven leaned down, the distance between them vanishing. The kiss touched Nysera's lips, slow, warm, yet powerful. It was not an act of possession, but one of confirmation. No one dared to interrupt that moment. No one dared to break it. For everyone felt that this was no longer a choice, but destiny. When he pulled away from her lips, he did not fully retreat. His forehead remained against hers. His breath stayed close, as if he needed to be certain she was still there. This time, his voice was very soft. "I will not let you go." Nysera did not answer. She did not need to. For the first time in her life, she did not want to leave either. Outside, the moon hung high. Silver light spilled across the entire territory. But in that moment, the world seemed to recede. No more Alphas, no more power, no more conspiracies. There were only two people, standing so close as if they had found each other after a very long journey. And for the first time in many years, Draven did not think of war, nor of territory, nor of power. He thought only of one thing, how to keep her here and protect her, not just with his strength, but with his very being. Nysera gently took his hand, a very light touch, but enough to make him pause. Not out of surprise, but because he understood. She was not being held. She was choosing to stay. And beneath that moonlight, it was not the Alpha King choosing a Luna. It was two souls who had finally found one another. And their story did not end here. It had only just commenced. Bonus chapter. The night the flight ended, the night had returned to stillness. No more hurried footsteps echoed in the corridors. No more icy commands rang out through the great hall. For the first time in a very long time, the Alpha King's fortress was submerged in a silence that felt almost foreign. Nysera stood alone on the balcony, moonlight spreading across the territory like a silver silk, soft and serene. The night breeze brushed past, carrying the scent of the distant forest, of the earth, and of freedom. She had never imagined she would stand here, not as a fugitive, but as someone who was meant to stay. Nysera placed her hand lightly on the stone railing. It was cold, yet it did not make her shiver. Perhaps because, for the first time, she was no longer alone. A very faint footstep sounded behind her. Without turning, Nysera knew who it was. "You are not sleeping." Draeven's voice was deep and low, no longer as sharp as before. Nysera shook her head slightly. "I am not yet used to it." A silence followed, but it was not uncomfortable. It was simply peace. Draeven stood behind her, very close, yet he did not attempt to touch her. The distance between them was small enough for her to sense his presence, yet large enough for him to halt, as if he were waiting not for an opportunity, but for permission. "I am the same," he said softly. Nysera turned slightly. The moonlight fell upon his face, softening the features that were always so hardened. For the first time, she saw him not as the Alpha King, but simply as Draeven, a man who had been alone for far too long. Their gazes met, and neither spoke. But this time, the silence was no longer heavy. Nysera took a small step toward him. Very small, yet enough to erase the distance between them. Draeven did not move. He did not advance, nor did he retreat. He simply stood there and waited. Nysera's hand rose, pausing in midair for a beat, then two, as if she herself were wondering if she should. Then she touched him, very lightly. Her fingers brushed his hand, where old scars still remained. Draeven stiffened not out of surprise, but because he realized that this time, she was no longer being drawn toward him. She was choosing him. A breath escaped his chest, not heavy, but profound. Nysera did not withdraw her hand. She tightened her grip just a little. Not strong enough to hold, but enough to say she did not want to let go. Draeven looked at her, his gaze no longer sharp, no longer cold. It was something deeper. "Are you afraid of me?" His voice was low, yet it was not the question of a king, but of a man waiting for a true answer. Nysera shook her head very slightly. No longer. A silence followed. But this time, it was not a distance. It was closeness. Draeven lifted his hand. This time, he did not hesitate. His fingers touched her cheek very lightly, as if fearing she would vanish if he touched any harder. Nysera did not evade. She leaned slightly into the touch. A natural reflex, without thought. It simply felt right. The distance between them disappeared, not rushed, not urgent, as if both were learning how to be near one another. Draeven leaned down but paused just a bit, a very tiny space, as if he were giving her the chance to retreat. Nysera did not retreat. Instead, she drew him closer, very light, yet sufficient. The kiss touched down gentle, yet fervent, and entirely without possession. It was simply staying, as if both had traveled too far, for too long, to finally find this stopping point. Draeven did not pull her close immediately. His hand rested on her back as if still maintaining a sliver of control, until Nysera leaned against him, very lightly, but it was enough to shatter the final distance. Only then did he hold her, not tight, not urgent, but certain, as if she were exactly where she was meant to be. When the kiss ended, he did not move away. His forehead remained against hers, his breath still close. "I will wait," he said softly, "if you are not yet ready." Nysera shook her head slightly, her gaze never leaving his. "I have run enough." A very small sentence, yet enough to change everything. Draeven closed his eyes for a beat, as if he were holding on to that moment. Not from fear of loss, but because for the first time, he had something worth keeping. Outside, the moon still hung high. The night wind brushed past, lighter than before. And on that balcony, there was no longer an Omega in flight, no longer an Alpha standing alone. There were only two people, standing very close. And beneath the moonlight, it was not destiny that held them. It was their own choice.